see some familiar faces who've been to some of my webinars before, and some new people too. So as it was the month of love with Valentine's Day coming up on Sunday, special note to any men out there who have forgot to get themselves sorted for that. I thought we'd talk about a love theme for today's webinar because where you get people, you are really realistically going to get some love. But I wanted to split that into a number of areas and how that impacts the work environment. So before we get on to what we're going to talk about, those of you who have listened to me will know a little bit about me. I am an HR professional. I run a consultancy, Red Elephant HR, and I also have the Business Springboard where we deliver management leadership development training. A difference with our training is that all of our trainers, including myself, are practitioners as well as trainers. So the training that we give, and we receive very good feedback from, is real life, and it's actually happening here and now in the HR world and in management leadership world. So that's a bit about myself, and obviously the disclaimer and copyright. The slides do belong to the Business Springboard, and any information that you receive today isn't designed to be specific advice for a problem you may have. Okay, so that's a boring bit over with. Okay, so love at work. An interesting area, and really interesting when I was doing some Googling and putting my information together for the webinar. And there's many different angles you can come about love at work. There's a lot of literature out there about relationships at work, which we're going to end on talking about loving your colleagues. But firstly, we're going to go through loving your employees and loving your employer, because I think that's an absolute key part. And I say when I did the Googling, it does come up about relationships at work, but relationships aren't just between colleagues falling in love and having a relationship. There needs to be that strong two-way relationship between an employee and an employer. And we can often forget about the importance of that. To give you, some context of examples, that I work with some small businesses that might not even have a contract of employment in place, and I say that sets out that relationship in the way that you want going forward. How we communicate with people, what we say to people through media, all this makes a difference to how we're going to have that two-way relationship between employee and employer. So when I look at loving your employees, I'm going to look about some induction and onboarding, some feedback, reward and culture. And then I'm going to look about loving your employer, so we can encourage people to give us loyalty and belonging to the organisation, and end on that relationships at work as well. As Liz said, please do talk to me. The chat box is open, happy for anybody to share stories, ask me questions as we go through, give some insight what's going on in your organisation. I'm going to hopefully run a couple of polls as we go through, which Liz will hopefully look to set up, asking a couple of questions that we can debate. But talk to me, please. Yeah, use the box. It would be great to hear from you. As Liz said, I will have time for questions at the end. If anything crops up that I can answer as we go through, I will. If not, I'll definitely come back to you at the end. Okay, so loving your employees. And it obviously starts with recruitment. I think old-fashioned recruitment, I'll call it, and many years back where people went into a job and stayed there till retirement, there wasn't so much focus on making the candidate actually want to love you. But now there has to be. It's definitely a two-way process. We have such a more competitive recruitment market where candidates can choose as well as we can choose the best people. And those of you who are focused in recruitment, there's nothing more frustrating that when you find the ideal person that you really want in your business and offer them the job and they turn you down. It can be almost as hurtful as if the shoe's on the other foot and you don't get the job that you really do want. So it's got to start from, we've got to think about the impressions that we give our candidates and setting the right and a very truthful account of who we are and what it's like to work here so they can make the best choices for them. I've put first impressions there because I think that's an important point. And when we think about what motivates people to join organisations, I worked with a company who were in a very old building and it wasn't too pleasant. It looked quite shabby from outside. It was in a traditional industry area in a not a brilliant place, and it reflected the organisation at that time. It had actually been in the building for about 40 years. And it had a factory and some offices. The offices, as they weren't the best to look at. Now, the company had been bought out by a much larger global company, and we'd actually already approved a new building, and we'd secured a new building on a lovely new business park that really looked nice, shiny and new and beautiful, and was going to really reflect the company as it progressed. So we had quite a big recruitment drive on to do with this expansion, and I was finding lots of people weren't turning up for interview. And when I was getting in touch with them the following day, so, you didn't arrive yesterday, what happened? They were saying, oh yeah, we drove past the night before just to check out where you were, and decided it wasn't for me. And that was even before speaking to us. So I put something different in place, and I actually did first interview at a local hotel. And I took the plans for the new building, and I was completely honest and said, this is who we are, this is what we're about. Where we are now doesn't reflect that. This is what we're moving into. And then I made a second interview at that original building, but they had a good impression that this wasn't, who we were all about by that point. And it ended up being a really successful recruitment campaign. So we have to think about first impressions. We want people to want to be with us. I've recently ran a mini assessment day for an administrator position. And first off, you can think, oh, that's a bit heavy-handed for an administrator, but the company in question have a really big focus on people and the right people fit into the organisation and shared characteristics. So we made it much more about them understanding who we were, that could meet the team and really put people at ease to find out who people are, and we can choose the best fit on there. So think about your recruitment process and think about the image that you want to progress. And that obviously goes into induction and onboarding, and that people want to feel welcome. A planned induction makes somebody feel like you've thought about them joining. They know what they're doing. They also know what's required of them in the first couple of weeks, any bits of paperwork or work function they need to do, where they need to sit. All very important things. Very simple, but quite often lost. And we need to really maximise on these simple opportunities that will bring us a lot of benefits. Making sure people have the right tools for the job. When they start on the first day, have they got telephone, laptop if required? Have they got hammer or spade if that's required? But make sure everything's there that they can actually get to and access to do the job. And one very important thing is about regular feedback and review. Build into your induction program, particularly in that first week, actually specify times for feedback and review with the person that they're going to be reporting to, or designated as a supervisor, where they can sit down and have that feedback, for you to get feedback from them and for them to take any from you. So we want to bring them into the organisation and really get them up to speed as soon as possible on that basis. Also, when they're there and when you've got your staff, we want to be thinking about how we keep this relationship going and how we ensure that people do feel part of that team. And obviously reward's a key one, but reward doesn't just need to be monetary. It's quite a well-known researched fact that money is a short-term motivator as long as it's at an adequate level. So we don't have to think that everything is based around financial reward when we look at that. Appreciation, recognition, achievement are far bigger motivators when people have those base level motivators in check. Think about your communication. You don't want the attitude to be, oh, nobody tells us anything around here. It wants to be that you have facilities in place to communicate with your staff. I've also put social events and team building on there, and it will depend on your culture of what you put in place for those sorts of events. But they don't have to be the extravagant. I think probably about late 90s we went through this really big phase where everybody had to go outdoors and swing from trees to team build or build a cabin in the woods or something. It doesn't have to be that extravagant, but you can have other things in place. I probably hand on heart say one of the best places I worked was not long after graduating, and I worked for a company that was a really nice culture in place. And they had a sports and social club, and it was an opportunity for us to get together and do things out of work. Now, obviously, events out of work have a whole other webinar about our responsibilities as employers, so we have to think these things through. But it meant that we really felt this strong belonging to that team of people. And it was really nice, because if in a world, especially of skills shortages where people move around, if we get good people, we want to keep them. And other things that can keep people in the job, yeah, I said if as long as the money's right and the location, working conditions, etc. Other things like your relationships with your peers have a really big impact, your relationships with your manager. And if, a competitor dangles a carrot in front of somebody, or your best person for a couple of extra thousand to move, they've got to then weigh up the decision, well, hang on, I actually like where I work. And in fact, I could go so far as say, I love my job. And these things will make a really big difference. And this is exactly what we get into. Um, I also put fun at work and question mark on there because obviously we're here to do a job, and fun doesn't mean to say that we can't do that job, but it's about doing it in a way where, again, people feel comfortable and people feel happy at work, and well-managed employees who know exactly what's required of them and the consequences of doing that. Um, they perform better. Our productivity can get much better. Now, I love some of the old studies on flexible working, where looking to give employees flexibility, perhaps condensed working weeks to 9-day fortnight. There was quite an old study now, but Rank Xerox, the American firm, they ran a study where they allowed employees to work on a production line, so it wasn't about presenteeism, it was about output, and allowed them to work a condensed working week of 9 days. So they had one Friday and every two off. And they saw their productivity increase by around over 50%, which is massive. Sorry, no, 30%. That would be a really good, we'd love 50%, but it was 30% that they increased by, which is a massive impact if you could increase your productivity. And the reasons why it's flexible working. When these days when we've got a big emphasis on flexible working, not just for working parents, but people want things outside of work. If we can give them the facilities to have that work-life balance, to make them have fun at work and respect for the workplace, it's going to have a really big impact on us holding on to our key people. The last thing I put in there, which is by no means least, is good management, because all of this comes down to the skills of your managers to make sure that these things are implemented across the board in the organisation and very fairly, and keep up the motivation. And I think it's one thing that might be missing from some management toolkits, particularly in when we recruit new managers. It's something we need to give them the skills there to empower employees and make sure they've got the motivation on there too. Okay, so we also want our staff to love us. So really these two are very interlinked. So some of the things are share with the previous bit about loving your staff, because it is this two-way relationship. So we want to encourage this loyalty and commitment. We want belonging and teamwork. Now, really interested on this point, I actually did a piece of consultancy work in a food manufacturing plant, renowned for quite high absenteeism, and it was a highly unionised environment. They'd been through a lot of input into it to try and reduce absenteeism, and they'd done reward for attending work, they'd done punishment for not attending work, and they still had a very big issue with absenteeism. So I put a structure in place that didn't focus on reward or punishment. It was simply about team working, because what I found doing some studies is that the shifts were very mixed as a people. They didn't feel anything belonging to anything. So if they wanted to phone in sick or throw a sickie or a duvet day or whatever that may be, they weren't letting any of the colleagues down. They couldn't feel any impact themselves, and it didn't really mean anything. So we actually put a structure in place to really focus on teamwork. So they worked in groups of 7 for this particular production line, and they shared a shift and they shared tasks, so that when somebody was off, they felt missed and they felt a loyalty to their other teammates. And with the other interventions, that might be the ones that sprung to mind first about reward and punishment, this one had much larger impact on their absenteeism. So making sure that people feel belonging is really, really strong. Other things, suggestions that you could have to make a difference are things like suggestion schemes, so you value employees' input. Now, this doesn't mean you have to take account of all the suggestions that are put in place. And it'd be interesting if anybody in the chat box wants to share anything about any suggestion schemes that they do run. I've seen email ones before, I've seen, suggestion of the month, but things to encourage people to have that communication, that two-way communication with staff. I've also put feedback frameworks, and in this I include appraisals, one-to-ones, and an opportunity for that two-way communication. So communication comes an awful lot around this. We want people to want to be at work. Um, an interesting one is recruitment referrals, because I always think it's a very good sign if people refer their family and friends to work for your organisation, because it's kind of saying, well, I like it here, it's good enough to work, come and join us. I think if people absolutely hated it, they wouldn't refer friends and family. It can also really help you with any recruitment costs and split into that recruitment procedure. So I think that's quite a good measure. Obviously, you can't recruit people if they haven't got the right skills for the job, and they still would be put into that pot to find the best candidate. But it's a good thing to say we value you, we value your thoughts, and it also quite a good measure of what people may be thinking about your organisation. So all of this fills into the culture that you want to create and the culture you want to maintain and the culture you want to project. One part that I aren't going to cover in the webinar because I didn't have that much time in there, was loving your customers. And a lot of this will feed through into the way the customers interact. And your culture, how you present that to the external world, will be very important. You know, I'm sure we can all name off the top of our head when we hear in the media, oh, they're a really good place to work. I've never been there. We've actually might not even know anybody that works there, but the media can highlight that, and the culture's projected, and odd little snippets that we pick up of things that they do to love their staff and to allow their staff to feed back to them can be highlighted. And then we build up this perception of the organisation, which obviously is great for interacting with our customers and the image we want to project. Also think about your benefits and rewards. Again, this shouldn't have to always be monetary. There's a lot of other things in there that can have a far bigger impact. But this will tie into the culture of what you want to create. Is it something where you want Employee of the Month? Is it something where you want to give flexible working to encourage that flexibility? So there's a lot of different things you can think of in benefits and reward that will bring that impact. Okay. So, moving on to this big thing of relationships at work. So if I just want to run a poll to ask you if any of you have had to deal with issues from a relationship at work. I don't mean from yourselves, by the way, as well. I'm not interested in a relationship, so you might have brought up there. But if you want to just click the button on there. So have any of you had to deal with issues for a relationship at work? And at the moment, everybody's saying yes, which is really interesting. Not surprising at all. But yeah, and if anyone want to use that chat box to give me a brief overview of what that may have been that you've had to deal with. Got some typing there. So just bear with us, I'm going to hear that. But it's not surprising they've got 100% because I was looking at stats for this, and 47% of people tend to meet their partner at work, which is no doubt really because the amount of time we do spend at work. We spend the vast majority of our lives, and at the moment I do say to my husband that he has his work wife, which is the MD at his work, because he spends more time with her than me. But we do spend an awful lot of time there. We can be with people with shared interests and around people who have that opportunity to banter and to make relationships. The other really interesting thing is that relationships at work are the most likely, when they start at work, are the ones that are most likely to last. So far above people that meet in a pub or a restaurant or on the internet or through friends. Relationships at work are the most likely to last, which brings us some challenge, but there's also some, things that we need to be aware of. If these things are going to last, it might not just be a fleeting thing that we can say, oh yeah, that'll be over in a couple of months and finished. These ones, lots of them are here to stay, which is really interesting. Just having a look at what Lynn said. Yeah, here we're not just talking about love relationships between people who may get married, etc., or become in a relationship. It's family relationships too. So that is a really interesting one when you may work with a family member. It kind of ties into the last slide about referring family and friends to work, and it can have an impact because then you've got to ensure that things are dealt fairly. Now, I know lots of organisations where they have, two people who are married working for the same company, and it can have really interesting consequences. Actually, my mum and stepdad worked together, and they had to stop because they just found they had nothing else to talk about apart from work outside of the the office environment. But I tend to find it goes one way, especially if it's a manager and subordinate. It's very hard to get that straight down the middle of the road and to be completely fair. I see a lots of people, sometimes people presume, oh, they'll be nicer to that person because they know them or related to them. It often goes the other way, and people overmanage and more critical of people that they have some sort of relationship with. Um, And arguments, yeah. Oh, yeah, free bar events. The alcohol will always play a big part in it, yeah. And Christmas dues are when some fleeting relationships sometimes happen as well, that of course we have to manage. So yeah, it's really interesting to see that lots of you have come across these issues about relationships at work, and not surprising, because we like it or not, it is going to happen. The things to think out, not just about a relationship as in a love relationship, but friendships. And what I want to talk about here is a bit about power in the organisation. And if you have a team of people, it's when kind of teamwork gone mad is what I'll say, when the power of leading the team actually comes away from the leader and is held with the team, because they have such close relationships in there, and they almost in effect kind of gang up on the management structure. So it's quite a balancing act we've got to do here. We want to encourage people to have a relationship and get along together, but we've got to be careful still of where that power sits. Another very key area is this unreciprocated love, which probably brings us a lot of legal issues where somebody has a love interest in one person and the other person doesn't. And I'll come on to that a bit more when we talk about some caution areas. So I wanted to just cover quickly the legal pitfalls with relationships at work, and two of the biggest areas are discrimination and harassment. Really interesting, when I love the old Google, but searching the internet for some pictures to go on slides, and I Googled photos of relationships at work, and very interestingly, they were all different sex people in the pictures, whether it be cartoon or real life stills. And I thought that was really interesting, that is on the internet these days, but of course not a reflection of the society we live in whatsoever. And we do have to think about discrimination in all elements of that, between same-sex couples and different sex couples, and what that would mean. Now, historically, a lot of the case law around this was often when a man and a woman at work would have a relationship, the man would be the manager, the woman would be the subordinate, and the woman would get dismissed through that. And very rightly so. There's a lot of cases where women then claim sexual discrimination because they were dismissed for being the female party, and they won these cases and got awarded quite high figures in compensation. Obviously, there are no limits on compensation for discrimination and harassment, so we do have to think this is a big risk area. So in that, we do have to think about treating people fairly, and especially if one member of the relationship is more senior than the other, and we're not picking up any issues of discrimination there. Harassment is probably where it does fall into unreciprocated love, and we want to ensure we have a duty to provide a safe working environment for our staff. If there is somebody at work who is harassing somebody in a love way, we need to ensure that whilst at work and under our care, we provide that safe working environment. So we need to look at that and how we deal with it. So a second poll I just wanted to ask, and very interestingly, because everybody who joined the last poll did have issues. Who has a policy in place to deal with relationships at work? Let's see what happens. Yeah, and this is no. So really interesting. And again, not surprising at all. That's what I was kind of expecting to see in the polls. So it's very interesting that here we have an HR issue that we all are coming up against, but we don't have policies in place. And I think we need to be quite careful with policies. Obviously, we can't document every eventuality in the workplace, but we want to make sure we are prepared, and I think set out from the beginning. Extensive policies, I don't think, have a massive place for this, but we definitely need some sort of statement, perhaps in a handbook or a limited policy statement to go in place. We've got to be very careful with some patronising restrictions, which again I think, many years ago some statements in these policies were very patronising to individuals, because we're talking about adults, if the workplace, or young people, and we need to be quite careful about what we're putting in place and the wording that we're using, and also bear in mind any discrimination issues of how a policy is wrote. Um, we want to also safeguard a right to privacy. So, it is a big question. Can we force people to tell us if they're in a relationship at work? And that's where the case law will come into place, and it's a bit of a grey area of how much we can expect people to disclose. I think if it has an impact at work, then we're fine to ask for that, but then make sure that you don't have information there that is going to give you an issue in managing it. It's kind of the right amount of information that we want to have. So when is it right to ask that? I had a recent case where an area manager was allegedly having a relationship with a site manager. And it's amazing how many you have. You suddenly have a whole team of Sherlock Holmes working for you, and they're great detectives, and it gets reported back because they've seen somebody 100 miles away holding hands or what have you. But it's amazing how gossip can get out of hand in these things. And this was brought to the senior management's attention. And we actually had an open and honest discussion with him to say, look, it's come to we actually had a discussion with them both individually. This has been flagged up. This is what people are saying. You're entitled to do whatever you want to outside of work, but you work together, you're a manager. We need to just get some boundaries in place of how we're going to manage this. So I think that's something quite important in there, to be able to have the culture with your staff where you can have some open and honest conversations for the right reasons, respecting privacy, but ensure that the issues that you need to know about for work are highlighted. Something else in a policy needs to look at that business continuity. So if you've got a very large organisation and opportunities to move people around, if you need to separate two people in a relationship, if that is your policy, that you can't have people working together, you may be able to do that in a large organisation and transfer from one department or one work unit to another. But what if you don't? What if it's a specialised role that you can't move somebody to? Do you still allow them to work together? How are you going to manage that? And I'm not saying by any means that you have to separate everybody that falls in love. You definitely don't. They might want to. You might want to. The colleagues might feel uncomfortable. But you just need to manage that within your culture, and the clearest way is to set out some kind of policy statement that again gives you a bit of flexibility but allows you to assess individual circumstances. So it should focus on, we encourage open communication, we're looking to support people with their lives and how that impacts on the business, and encourage people to share things with you and give you some opportunities if relationships at work may be managed where we can move departments should it be required, etc., etc. So giving you that flexibility in there, what you need. So I thought I'd end on some caution areas, and one of the biggest ones that kind of worries me is when it goes wrong, and I think as employers that's where we have a lot of our caution. We've said lots of relationships last, what they do, but still quite a few are going to end. And it might be all great when it's working, but when it doesn't, this is where the harassment claims can come up, and you want this safe working environment for people. So that's when you might think about having people working together who are in a relationship and how you might deal with that. You don't want anybody complaining unfair treatment in either party of a relationship to think they'd be treated less favourably than the other person. So we've got to really consider that. And also consider the confidentiality. I mentioned gossip, which often happens. Put a group of people together and you'll hear lots of people coming up with various stories and what have you. But we've got to respect people's confidentiality and sort of a right to privacy. So managers have to be very, very clear on this to not get involved in that gossip and how we actually manage somebody's dignity and respect in the workplace. Maintaining confidentiality but doing what we need to allow business continuity. If there is any dismissals, be very careful around that. As I say, a lot of historic case law have come under discrimination where one party's been dismissed. So be very, very careful around that. And that doesn't necessarily just have to be on the basis of sex discrimination. The other bits of discrimination might come into play, and also bear in mind age discrimination if one person's older than the other or younger than the other. So it's what we do have to think of. Another key bit, and probably something I, again, through time haven't gone into, but about competitor risk, especially if you dismiss somebody and they go to a competitor because they have specific skills. But also, what if that relationship forms not inside your company, but with a competitor or a customer? And you have to be very careful, make sure your contracts cover confidentiality, and you have that culture that enforces that and the management style that enforces that. I have had it before where some directors have been extremely concerned because a sales manager at one company is in a relationship with a sales manager at a competitor. And it's, as long as it's set out from the beginning, people's obligations, it can clear that up, but can be a very big risk area. The other thing is unbalancing the team. Um, Team dynamics are really interesting. If they get thrown out, it can cause quite a stir. I actually interviewed somebody this week who did tell me she was in a team of 3, and she was obviously female. There was another female and a male, and the other male and female had an affair, which has grew and blossomed into a long-term relationship now. But at the time, they kept this very secret from the other team member. And when she found out about it, she felt so betrayed and never recovered that relationship. So they can have a quite big impact on the team, and we need to really think that through and think how we will manage these situations. So I'm kind of playing a bit doom and gloom, but at the end of the day, this is all could bring us lots of big positives about love. We want people to get along. We want people to belong in. We want people to have relationships, as long as we have quite a keen structure around the way that we manage that in the workplace. So that's my whistle-stop tour of those few areas. I know we've had a couple of comments and things going through, but if anybody else has other questions that they want to pose, then please do use the chat box now and put something in there. Liz is just letting you know about some other webinars that are going on. That is there for you. Okay, and then just remember the nice part of it, all because 2 people fell in love. We're never going to control this. And love is a beautiful thing. I will end on that note on a Valentine's, and wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day. And I hope that's been useful. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you all. Thank you for joining. If anybody wants to hear more about us at the Business Springboard, we do at the moment are running a series of masterclass training courses, which you can find at our website, and we also do in-house training in there as well. So thank you very much, and I'll pass you back to Liz, and hopefully speak to you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Joanne. Gosh, that was lots of information covered in a very short time. Just put the links there for us with regards to the next webinars. The restricted covenants one might be quite interesting with regards to what Joanne was saying there at the end, with regards to how to manage people from a competitor perspective. So it'd be great to see you there. If you do have any questions, then please get in touch with us. I will send you that email as I promised. And thank you all very, very much for your input and your engagement there on the webinar. Made it truly enjoyable. Thank you, everybody.